I had now arrived at that particular point of my walk where four roads met. The road to Hampstead, along which I had returned, the road to Finchley, the road to West End, and the road back to London. I had mechanically turned in this latter direction, and was strolling along the lonely high road, idly wondering, I remember, what the Cumberland ladies would look like, when in one moment every drop of blood in my body was brought to a stop by the touch of a hand laid lightly and suddenly on my shoulder from behind me. I turned on the instant, with my fingers tightening round the handle of my stick. There, in the middle of the broad, bright high road, there, as if it had that moment sprung out of the earth or dropped from the heaven, stood the figure of a solitary woman, dressed from head to foot in white garments. Her face bent in grave inquiry on mine, her hand pointing to the dark cloud over London. As I faced her, I was far too seriously startled by the suddenness with which this extraordinary apparition stood before me in the dead of night and in that lonely place, to ask what she wanted. The strange woman spoke first. "Is that the road to London?" she said. I looked attentively at her as she put that singular question to me. It was then nearly 1 o'clock. All I could discern distinctly by the moonlight was a colorless, youthful face, meager and sharp to look at, about the cheeks and chin, large, grave, wistfully attentive eyes, nervous, uncertain lips, and light hair of a pale, brownish yellow hue. There was nothing wild, nothing immodest in her manner. It was quiet and self-controlled, a little melancholy, and a little touched by suspicion. Not exactly the manner of a lady, and at the same time, not the manner of a woman in the humblest rank of life. The voice, little as I had yet heard of it, had something curiously still and mechanical in its tones, and the utterance was remarkably rapid. She held a small bag in her hand, and her dress, bonnet, shawl, and gown, all of white, was, so far as I could guess, certainly not composed of very delicate or very expensive materials. Her figure was slight, and rather above the average height. Her gait and actions free from the slightest approach to extravagance. This was all that I could observe of her in the dim light and under the perplexingly strange circumstances of our meeting. What sort of a woman she was, and how she came to be out alone in the high road an hour after midnight, I altogether failed to guess. The one thing of which I felt certain was that the grossest of mankind could not have misconstrued her motive in speaking, even at that suspiciously late hour and in that suspiciously lonely place. The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. Your Sunday Penguin for today. Welcome, my friends, once again to the rustic Vaughan Lodge. And here we'll be doing our Sunday Penguin, The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, the first sensation novel of Victorian London. And it was certainly sensational. It caused a sensation back in Victorian London. This book was a huge, huge hit. This was published November 26, 1859 through August 25th, 1860 in the magazine All the Year Round. So Wilkie Collins, he was already a known author when he wrote this, but this really boosted his career. Suddenly he was a best-selling writer. Because like I said, this was a sensational book, and everybody was reading this book. It was a big deal. Of course, sensation novels were looked down upon. what a sensation novel was. It was kind of the type of story that would take some of the fear and suspense that was common in a Gothic novel and was put in a modern setting. Uh, so you would have upper middle class characters, for example, experiencing all of these dangerous situations. Uh, and this one was a good one. In this book, Walter Hartwright, a teacher of drawing, who has just saved the life of his friend Professor Pesca. And Professor Pesca, in gratitude, has gotten him this job at this estate to teach drawing to two young ladies. And the two young ladies would be two half-sisters. Marian Halcombe was one of them. Marian Halcombe, who was unattractive. She sounds pretty unattractive, Marian Halcombe. But if there is a hero in this book, it's really not Walter. We like Walter. Walter's a nice guy, but he's not as brave or as smart as Marian Halcombe. Marian Halcombe is the real hero of this book. She's a really great character. She was very popular. She was the popular character of this book, other than the Woman in White, of course. And then there was her sister, Laura Fairley, the fair Laura Fairley. Laura is the hot sister. Guess which one our man Walter fell for? But unfortunately for Walter and for Laura, Laura has already been engaged. She was promised by her father to this guy, Sir Percival Glyde. He's a baronet. He's a bad baronet. We know right away that Sir Percival is a real jerk and that he's really super suspicious and he just wants to marry Laura for her money. We know this right away. She doesn't want to marry this guy, but she feels she has to because the word has been given. She has given her promise to marry this guy. One of the themes of this book is just how few rights women had at the time when this was written. They had very limited legal rights. And if you were married to somebody, that gave your husband a lot of control. And that is one of the things that this book is kind of speaking against. There were also a lot of fears that this book plays upon, one of which would be the fear of being locked away in a madhouse or an asylum for the insane when, of course, you were not insane. That was a fear, and this book plays upon that fear. There is another great villain in this book besides Sir Percival, which would be the sinister and evil Count Fosco. What are his evil plans, and why is he involved with Sir Percival anyway? And why are they always hanging out, plotting together? And how is the Woman in White, which Walter meets at the beginning of this story, in that little piece that I told you, how is she involved in all this? Because she is. Coincidentally, she is heavily involved in the entire situation of this story. And I don't want to give away the plot because there's a ton, other than what I've just given you, because there's a ton of twists and turns. There is danger and daring do. There's a lot of stuff that happens in this book. And you want to experience it all. Unspoiled. Because this is a great book. I've read it twice. This is my Penguin Classics hardcover edition. Only bad thing about these editions is that, as you can see from the birds and the lettering there, the ink kind of wears off if you handle these guys too much. But otherwise, these Penguin hardcovers are great books. They're really solid. Like I said, they're like bricks, man. I carry this around with me all over the place. Literally all over the place. And read it everywhere, indoors, outdoors, everywhere. And they really hold up, these books. So Yeah, they've got the problem where the ink on the cloth can kind of rub off over time, but they're really well constructed books, so that kind of makes up for it. And I like this one a lot. I like this edition, and I love this book. This is one of my favorite books. Hugely entertaining book, full of mystery, and I highly recommend it. So yeah, this is The Woman in White, your Sunday Penguin for today. The very first sensation novel. And certainly I think Wilkie Collins' best book by far. He wrote some other good ones. He also wrote some ones that weren't so good. He best friends with Charles Dickens, this guy. He had that thing where, like Charles Dickens did, where they'd make all these really eccentric, extreme kind of characters that were a little bit over the top sometimes. There's a little bit of that in this book. There's a lot of that in some of his other books. But this one, it just works really well. Everything clicks in this book. So read this book if you haven't read it already. Thanks for joining me here at the Rustic Vaughan Lodge once again. Tomorrow, join me for Mythos Monday, and then on Tuesday, I've got a tag for you. So yeah, thanks guys, and I will see you again real soon.